You walk into a public restroom, lock the stall door, and sit down. And there it is again. A gap at the bottom wide enough to see shoes. A gap at the top wide enough to make eye contact with a stranger washing their hands. A gap on the side you swear wasn't there in the stall next to it. You've felt this 1,000 times, but you've probably never asked why. Why does a country capable of building skyscrapers and smartphones still can't build a bathroom door that reaches the floor? The answer isn't an accident. It isn't a cost-cutting oversight nobody noticed. It's a design choice with a strange, tangled history. And it says more about how a society thinks about privacy than you'd expect from a bathroom stall. Start with where this all began. Not in a school, not in a mall, in a factory. At the turn of the 20th century, as industrial workplaces exploded across the United States, business owners needed a fast, cheap way to give workers somewhere to relieve themselves without building actual rooms. The sociologist Laura Noreen, co-editor of a book examining the politics of public restrooms, has described these early stalls as something close to indoor outhouses, but with plumbing attached. They weren't designed for comfort, they were designed for speed and cost. And once that pattern was set, it became the default. Nobody stopped to reconsider it because nobody expected anyone to care. Here's the twist most people don't know. One of the earliest, most influential examples of this partial partition style didn't come from some anonymous factory contractor. It came from Frank Lloyd Wright. Yes, that Frank Lloyd Wright. The architect famous for reshaping American design forever also helped popularize off-the-floor bathroom partitions in the Larkin Building in Buffalo, New York, a major administrative building constructed for a mail-order soap company in the early 1900s. Wright wasn't thinking about privacy when he made that choice. He was thinking about airflow, light, and efficient cleaning. But the effect of his decision rippled forward for over a century. What started as a functional detail in one building became a national default for almost every public restroom that followed. Think about that. A design decision made more than 100 years ago for reasons that had nothing to do with your comfort is still shaping the exact bathroom stall you're sitting in today. So why did it stick around instead of evolving? Because it kept solving problems for everyone except the person inside the stall. Consider maintenance first. A gap at the floor means a janitor with a mop never has to open a single door, without waiting for someone to finish, without physically entering each stall. Multiply that convenience across thousands of public restrooms cleaned multiple times a day, and you start to see why building owners never had much incentive to change it. Then there's airflow. A sealed floor-to-ceiling box with a door creates a closed environment. Odor and moisture build up fast, especially in high-traffic public restrooms with limited ventilation systems. Gaps at the top and bottom let air move constantly, which keeps the space from feeling like a sealed chamber every time someone uses it. It's not a pleasant trade-off, but it is a practical one. There's also a colder, more clinical reason. Visibility. If something goes wrong inside a stall, whether it's a medical emergency, an altercation, or a jammed lock, a partial door lets someone outside see that something is wrong without having to break the door down. That same visibility discourages other behavior too. Vandalism, drug use, and other illicit activity are all harder to get away with when a passerby can glance down and see feet or glance through a slim gap and see movement. The design isn't subtle about this trade-off. It sacrifices your privacy for a small amount of collective oversight. And finally, there's the most unglamorous reason of all: money. Every inch of material used in a partition costs money to manufacture, ship, and install. A door that stops a foot above the floor uses less material than a full floor-to-ceiling panel. Multiply that savings across the manufacturing of millions of stall partitions installed in restaurants, schools, offices, and airports across the country, and the smaller doors start to look less like an oversight and more like an economic default. Nobody had a reason to challenge, so the gaps stayed. Not because anyone loved them, because they were convenient for everyone except the one person who actually had to sit behind them. Here's where it gets interesting, because this is not a universal design. Walk into a public restroom in much of Europe, and you'll often find something completely different. Floor-to-ceiling stalls, sometimes with their own sink, that function almost like a private room, the same bodily needs, the same public setting, and yet an entirely different design philosophy. If gaps were truly necessary for cleaning, ventilation, and safety, you'd expect them everywhere. They're not. Which means the American version isn't an inevitable solution to a universal problem. It's a cultural default that took hold early and never got seriously questioned. This is where the research gets more revealing. The environmental psychologist Alexander Kira conducted one of the most detailed studies ever done on bathroom design, and his work, published decades ago, found that Americans have expressed discomfort with the lack of restroom privacy since at least the 1960s. That's not a modern complaint born from social media callouts. That's a documented, decades-old tension between how restrooms are built and how people actually feel using them. The discomfort isn't new. What's new is that people are finally saying it out loud, so why does it still feel oddly personal every time you notice a gap? Because privacy, even in something as mundane as a bathroom stall, taps into a much older instinct. You are, in that moment, at your most physically vulnerable. Evolutionarily, humans have always sought seclusion for bodily functions, tucking away from the group, from predators, from exposure. A gap under a door doesn't just let in air. It reintroduces a sliver of that ancient vulnerability into an otherwise mundane daily act. Your brain registers it, even if you can't quite explain why a 2-inch gap makes you feel so exposed. None of this means change is impossible. Some newer buildings, upscale offices, and updated public facilities have started installing floor-to-ceiling partitions, marketed explicitly as a privacy upgrade. It costs more. It takes more material. It's harder to clean. But it's happening, slowly, in the places willing to spend the extra money. So the next time you sit down in a stall and see a stranger's shoes through the gap at the bottom, you'll know it's not bad luck. And it's not bad construction. It's the echo of a factory floor from over a century ago, a decision Frank Lloyd Wright never expected to outlive him, and a quiet cultural agreement that convenience mattered more than privacy. You walked into a stall expecting a moment of solitude. What you got instead was 100 years of design history standing between you and the door.